Hello, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi. I'm here with a former French atheist. He's still French, but he was an ex-atheist, or he is an ex-atheist. Let me get my words right today. He's an ex-atheist. He's now a Christian philosopher, and today we're looking at, or we're going to hear his story, how his journey that led from atheism to being a Christian, and now he's also a Christian philosopher. So the guy that I have with me today, his name is Guillaume Bignon.
That is really impressive. There was a lot of homework in that pronunciation work here.
I was telling you right before we went live, like I put a little bit too much work into it because I wanted to make sure that I got it right, but also I don't typically put this much work into it, but like your name, if you just spell it out phonetically in like English, then it makes me want to say like Guillaume Bignon.
Yes,
that's
I get a lot of those at doctor's offices and on the phone.
Yes, Guillaume. I'm sure that you've heard everything, but it's Guillaume Bignon.
Yes, it's about right. Yes.
You said about right, so you're being nice. Okay. Well, so apart from the correct way to pronunciate your name, let's get into. Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience, people who have never heard you before. There's other. I'll let the audience know there are other interviews with Guillaume on David Wood's channel and stuff. So, and actually, the title of this video is very similar to David's. We just sort of happened to pick the same title, Great Minds and all that, but. So you can find what I want to do is try to get into some other details of your story, some of the arguments maybe that really played a part in your conversion to Christianity. So we're going to talk about all of that and fill out some of the details of your story and maybe get into you've got a book that's coming out soon. So we'll get into some really fun stuff today. And then maybe we'll even get into you're also well known online for compatibilism and your views on Calvinism. And you've even done responses to my friend Braxton Hunter and Leighton Flowers. So it's been there's a lot of stuff for us to talk about. But let me let you pick up here and inform the audience about who you are, a little more about you.
Yeah, so my name is Guillaume Bignon, as you so aptly pronounced yourself. I'm French, obviously, as my accent readily betrayed. So I was born in France, but I've lived in the US for now over 15 years. During the day, I am a software engineering manager. And this is the job that I've had since I finished my studies, basically, and I was still an atheist at the time. So this is the job that I pursued, not Christian philosophy at the time. And I am now also, in my spare time, a Christian philosopher. I have a master's in New Testament studies and a PhD in philosophical theology. And so I do spend some of my spare time in doing some research, writing, speaking, so books, conferences, this type of material. My topics of interest include the existence of God more broadly, because of my background and the conversion from atheism to Christianity. And but my areas of focus for professional level research has been free will and the metaphysics of free will, moral responsibility, and divine providence generally. And also in the more recent years, I've focused a lot of my work on soteriology around the doctrine of justification and the controversies between Catholics and Protestants. So it's been another area of research in more recent years. So this is a bit of my background and where I come from.
There's so much for us to talk about. My goodness. Okay, where should we let's. Well, first of all, actually, let me let the audience know that I have a couple free resources that I want to give you, and then we'll get into the story. So first, I've got a giveaway. This is not necessarily the giveaway, although these are free resources. Two free resources for you that I want to give you if you're new into apologetics. The Rationality of Christian Theism on the left, it's a free 60-page ebook. You can download both of these in the description. And on the right, the ultimate list of apologetics terms for beginners. I don't even know how many terms there are. I think there's probably around 100 different apologetics terms that I go in and define and explain and provide links to. Good resources on all of these terms. So if you're a beginner and you'd like to get your hands on some free resources, check the link in the description. You can get them that way. And then also we are in the middle of a giveaway that I want to let you know about. And we're giving away 25 copies of Taking Pascal's Wager, one of the best introductory books on apologetics out there. We've only given away 4 copies so far. So if you'd like to be part of this giveaway, you can still get your hands on one. Basically, all it takes is to become a $25 patron over at our Patreon account, and that the link to that is in the description of this video. Again, we have 21 copies left, so the first 21 people that sign up at the $25 or more amount are going to get a free copy. We're just going to send it directly to your address. So, all right, let's get into the meat of the interview for today. So, start us off. Why, because you don't really talk about in the interviews that I've seen with you, you haven't really fleshed out the reasons why you were an atheist in the first place, or at least I haven't heard that yet. So fill that part out for us. Like, why were you convinced in the first place that atheism was true? And that'll help us get started on this journey from atheism to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So, I grew up in France and from a traditionally Catholic background. So the practice was Catholic, but the belief was never really fundamentally there for me. So as my experience was fairly common, I suspect, among at least my siblings and some of my friends, we were going to church, but there was not a real life-giving faith in any sort of a real God who interacts with us or responds to prayer or that sort of a thing. It was kind of just a tradition. So the question of God, even though I was technically engaged in religion, the question of God's existence was almost never really raised for me. And when it came time to simply leave religion, it was obvious that my beliefs didn't change a whole lot. I had already been a practical atheist throughout this time. And when the opportunity was given to stop actually going to church because we were old enough to tell our parents that we didn't believe this stuff, and I say we because my older brother had pretty much the same route as I did at the same time, it was just a natural deconversion to say, well, deconversion, like stop practicing and put our practice in line with our professed belief. So there's not a strong philosophical atheistic argument that was convincing me at the time. It was more of the assumed worldview that was in the air. God had no relevance to us. We lived our life perfectly fine without, and we just ceased going to church, and that was the end of it. So there was initially not much of a change or a shift in posture or in mind. There was a growth of resentment, though, from having lost time going to church. And so I grew hostile to religious belief. And there was coming with that a bit of scorn and condescension that came, thinking that people who believe in God are just superstitious. And they're not really using their minds. So there was that type of aggressive posture towards theism. But and with that, a bit of scientific arrogance as well, because I did study math, physics, engineering in prep school and then engineering school. So I really enjoyed scientific thinking and reasoning, and I suppose I prided myself in some of those abilities. And it seemed like people who believed in God were not really in that camp of the rational people. So that was a little bit the attitude, but there was not a strong argument like, the problem of evil or the hiddenness of God or that type of a classical argument that would have convinced me at the time. It was just like, well, the question of God is obvious. He's not there. It doesn't exist. So why waste more time thinking about this?
So it was more like you were a cultural product of the culture that you lived in. Is that belief was just sort of there, which is interesting. Yeah. Growing up American, the opposite was true for me. And so when I started to look into things, I came with that presupposition and you came with the opposite one, and now you're in the Christian camp. So what is the sort of catalyst that led you to start to question your atheism? Because there was something something had to bring you out of what you sort of grew up with.
Yeah, it was a conspiracy, basically, and a conspiracy of circumstances, a complete happenstance. So I was in my mid-20s and I went on vacation to the Caribbean with my older brother on the island of St. Martin. And on the day where we were coming back from a distant beach, we didn't have a car. And for the first time in all of my life, we decided to hitchhike our way back home. And so we just raised our thumbs and waited for a car. And then a few minutes into this...
Wait, you were on St. Martin?
Yes.
When you were trying to hitchhike?
Yes, that's right. So
back home to France?
No, back to the house that we were at in St. Martin.
In St. Martin. Okay, I was like, how are okay?
Hitchhiking from the Caribbean to France. Yeah, that would have taken a long time. There was a lot of time for conversion there, and walking on water too. So that would have been impressive for my atheism. So the hitchhike was from a distant beach on the island. Hitchhike back to the house that we were staying at, which was my uncle's house. And
Okay.
so it was still fairly unexpected because it's the first time we ever hitchhiked. I mean, I was almost 25 and never hitchhiked before, but somehow we decided to do that because we didn't have a car to come back home. And a few minutes into that, a small car stopped with in it two American tourists, two women, and they were not even stopping to pick us up. They were just lost on their way from the airport to their hotel, and they were asking for directions. So we said, well, okay, where are you going? And they tell us the resort that they were going to, and it happened to be right next door to the house that we were staying at. So we told them, well, we'll tell you where it is if you pick us up, and we'll drive you there. And so they ended up picking us up, and we went to drop them off. And well, they dropped us off. But they were very attractive. One of them was a former model and actress, and the other one was also attractive. So one was from Miami, the other one was from New York. And so we tried to immediately get a connection and try to seduce them. I mean, at the time, like women conquest was a very important part of my endeavors. Let's put it this way. I was trying to simply live my life and be happy and find happiness in a number of things. So I was playing volleyball in a national league. I was playing music in a rock band, and was also interested in women. It was kind of some of my interests at the time that I thought were pursuing happiness in all of those fronts. And so the women conquest definitely kicked in here. I said, we have to see them again. This is really exotic. This is random. This is fun. So we tried to seduce them. And sure enough, they gave us their room number, and we made plans to see them again on the island later on. So we dropped them off at the hotel, and then we went to see them. We ended up taking them to a distant beach on the island. Long story short, I ended up going out with the one from New York, and so we spent some time on the island in this romance, and in pretty much in paradise. And very quickly, there's just a couple of things that she shared that was very problematic. She said, first of all, that she believed in God, which to me was intellectual suicide at that time, right? I thought this was really nonsense. And the second is that attached to her belief in God was the idea that abstinence before marriage was called for by her religious beliefs, that there wouldn't be no sex before marriage, which again, to me was absolutely unacceptable. So these were the two things that she shared. And I was hostile to that, but she was also extremely exotic and attractive, and I was very motivated to make this work. So I figured, well, I'm just going to have to convince her that she needs to let go of those beliefs so that we could be together and would be happy. And so this is what initially kickstarted me on the question of God that came back to haunt me many years after I had deconverted.
Yeah. So did you? Whoops, I got the wrong scene up here. Were you wanting to go after the one that was a model, or was it the other one, or were they both models?
The one. But I mean, they were both very attractive. The other one was also the blonde, blue eyes, and yes, very much somewhat cliche, very attractive American women. So for the French young men that we were, my brother and I, it was very appealing.
But what you're saying is that it was a girl who was like the person who got you started to think about the truth of Christianity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had absolutely no intention of ever getting close to religion in any sort of a meaningful way. And so when that happened, it came more as bad news. Like, okay, there's this great girl, but oh man, there's this thing on the way. So we have to convince her, explain to her that this is nonsense and that religion is not going to happen in my future.
Yeah, so atheists that are watching this are already like formulating all of these things in their mind about like why you became a Christian in the first place, because the story starts with a girl, but it doesn't end with a girl. So let's continue the story. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, so the vacation ended. I flew back to Paris, and she flew back to New York, and here we were in a very problematic long distance relationship. And I figured, okay, well, now I need to try to get on that question and to actually disabuse her of her silly beliefs in Christianity. But I realized very quickly that if I was going to refute what she believed, I at least need to understand or know what she believed. And I realized I had zero recollections of anything I had been told about Christianity when I was little. So I simply decided to get a little sense of what the Bible was saying. So I picked up an old Bible of mine and I started to read the New Testament to see what it actually said about this Jesus that she claimed to believe in. And this is an exercise that I did with the idea again of refuting her beliefs. But like you just mentioned, like atheists can already speculate about alternate motives. Like, oh, that there was a girl, so maybe you convert just for her. So I was very aware that there was actually counterbalancing reasons to either accept it or to reject it that were actually not relevant. And I had to force myself to say these are not relevant on either side of the question, because there's the first, there was the question of how much do I hate Christianity and their teachings about sexual ethics, which was extremely strong aversion. But I realized, okay, I don't like it, but that's not relevant to whether it's true. So I'm going to need to force myself to be a bit objective about that. And then on the other side of that question, like you pointed out, there was the girl. And now if I failed to convince her, there might be an incentive for me to say, all right, now if I have to be a Christian so that we can be together, then so be it, and I'll just jump the gun and do that. So that would be a reason to actually believe it, an incentive to believe it. But once again, that's one that was completely irrelevant to the truth. So I figured that on both of those counts, I really needed to fight off those urges, and I did my best to approach that question somewhat objectively. I mean, none of us is perfectly objective, but it was kind of an intentional effort to say, okay, let's think about this and let's consider what it says. So this is the approach I had, and to kind of show myself a bit open, I figured, I'm an engineer. There's at least one experiment that I can craft, and I figured, well, if God exists right now, he's presumably interested in this project of mine of looking into this. So why don't I go ahead and pray as an unbeliever? And I prayed that to a God I didn't believe in. I said, if you're out there, I'm looking into this. Why don't you go ahead and reveal yourself to me? I'm open. So I kind of did this first step of non-faith, but experimental prayer. And I opened the Bible and started to read the New Testament. These were the first steps that I took to figure out what the deal was.
Yes. Well, I mean, feel free to just continue the story here, because I don't really have anything else to say up until, because I truth be told, I know I know the story already. So I'm just like kind of waiting for my things that I want to say in response. So feel free to continue the story at this point, and I'll jump in when I.
Sounds good. So I read the New Testament, and there was a first surprise that I expected to be bored again with all the platitudes that I remembered being bored with when I was a child. And on the contrary, when I started to read about Jesus, I found him to be a compelling character that I had no place in my worldview for any of his talks about God or miracles or any of that things. But just on the sheer brilliance of his character, the interaction that he would maneuvered in conversations brilliantly. People were constantly trying to trap him, and he would just have the perfect comebacks, escape, and challenge them. So it was a very compelling character who spoke with authority, and we clearly knew what he was doing. So there was a little bit of a challenge there to encounter a Jesus that I didn't really know. And also, I did realize, at the time I was an atheist, but I did not believe that Jesus was an invention. Right? I believed that he was a historical person. And so I realized I didn't really have a good account for who I thought that this historical Jesus actually was, what he did. And maybe that would be something that I would need to complete a gap in my knowledge to assess who do I really think he was, if not indeed the Son of God and the Messiah. So there was a little bit of a primary challenge when I read the New Testament there. But that was very early, and I couldn't have ended up in church even if I had wanted to, because at that point I was playing volleyball in nationals, and every weekend I would travel around the country to play the games of volleyball. And this is another twist in my story, which is that only a few weeks after I prayed that unbelieving prayer, out of the blue, I had a shoulder injury on my right arm, which is the dominant arm. So that's the one where I used to spike. And without explanation, without any accident, out of the blue, my shoulder started to get inflamed. About 15 minutes into every practice, I just couldn't spike. And so the doctors couldn't really figure out what was going on. The physical therapist's best effort didn't help. And so I was basically told, look, you need to rest your shoulder. So you're going to have to be off of volleyball courts for a few weeks. And there I was now with my Sunday mornings available. And since I had raised that question of the truth of Christianity, I figured, well, let me investigate what those Christians do when they get together. And so this is the time where I actually decided to go and visit a church. Again, how I got the address of a church as kind of a twisted circumstances. My American girlfriend had come to visit me. She had been given the address of a church, but she never ended up going there. But she used my computer to get the address, so I was able to go back and get the address of that church without telling her. And then I decided, let me go and see those people to see what they do and what they teach. And so on that first Sunday morning without a volleyball game, I took my car and I drove to Paris to that church. And I describe it as I said that it's like I went to the zoo to see some weird animals that I've never heard of, that I've seen in books but never seen in real life, and I wanted to see what they do. And I walked into that church. It was extremely awkward for me because I was really like, I felt ashamed, and that if any of my friends or family could see me in there, I would die of shame, really, because somehow being in the church was already an intellectual crime enough to warrant mockery. But nevertheless, I pressed through and I wanted to see what they do. So here again, I was challenged. I saw people who genuinely prayed to a God that they thought was hearing their prayers. And unlike what I had been accustomed to in my childhood of simply recited prayers, people really seemed to think that there was a God and that he was interacting with them. And I sat down and I listened to the service. I looked at the musicians were really good. So as being a musician myself, I thought, hey, this is really new. This is not the pipe organs of my childhood. And then the preacher gave his message. And I don't remember a word that he said. I don't know if I was just too focused and absorbed in my feeling that I would be ashamed if anyone could see me, or if simply I was just blind to what was said. I don't remember a thing he said, but I remember the service ending, and I figured I had seen enough. I figured that I've understood what they're doing, and I've seen the gist of it. And so I jumped on my feet, and I figured, okay, let me escape before anybody actually introduces themselves, so that I don't have to connect with anybody, and I don't have to be accountable for my presence in the building. So jumped on my feet, and I walked to the back of the church to escape. And I opened the door, and I had literally 1 foot out the door when there's a big blast of chills that started in my stomach and went up in my chest and grabbed me by the throat. And I was frozen on the doorstep, and with good goosebumps. And I heard myself thinking, this is ridiculous. I have to figure this out. And so I closed the door and turned around, and I went straight to the head pastor, and I introduced myself. And I told him, so you believe in God, huh?
So
said,
before you continue, so what was this at the end of the church service when like everyone was greeting each other? Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a question I had, because I was wondering, I was like, did you just like go straight up to the pastor in like the middle of his sermon and be like, hey, what's up, bro? So like, you believe in God, right?
Yeah.
So no, it was at the end of the service. Okay.
I didn't crash the sermon. That would have been fun, but that would be in a different story. No, it was the sermon was definitely over. I think the band was still playing some of the wrap-up music. So he was off of the stage and sitting down, and I guess talking to some of the congregants. And so I went there and I just grabbed him, and I guess I might have cut the line of people who were trying to talk to him, but I didn't interrupt the sermon. No. So
before you get to that point, because you've just described a religious experience, I think, and we can dwell on that for just a little bit. So what would you describe your experience of trying to leave the church? Would you describe that as a religious experience?
Well, yes, and given the context, obviously, and my my present Christian self cannot help but describe it like that. I think that at the time it was clearly a strange experience, but it's not something that necessarily triggered lots of interrogations to me, because it's not. It was very unique, and the timing was certainly remarkable. But you can dismiss it as a simply. I mean, it's just a biological thing. Like I had
it could have even been like a panic attack.
Right? I've had chills before. I've had there was nothing obviously supernatural about whatever happened to me. It's just that it was just a complete catching my course and just at the right time. So yes, certainly I would describe it as clearly God intervening just at the right time and powerfully. But on the moment itself, it was not raising enough of a question for me to say, what just happened to me? This was clearly the hand of God. It was just something that caught me in my track and sent me to the pastor.
Okay, so was this something that played a part in your credence that theism is true, or that Christianity is true?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the many instances in the whole story where there was an event that was improbable enough that it certainly led me to wonder, like, what happened, and
And you're
then to
saying because of
conclude
the
that.
timing of it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, also the experience itself was unique enough, but there was, how do you describe it? Like, it's still something I felt, right? So
Uh-huh.
a feeling is like, you can have a feeling even if you don't believe in God. Like, it's like a big chills, and that rushes through your throat. It again, I don't want to be too, like, put too much stock on this, and don't want to be too skeptical either. I just want to have the right proper balance to say this was remarkable, but probably something that you could honestly dismiss and not have to give an account for. So this is
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
the
that's fair.
that I was in.
It's just like in your mind, because you're the one who had the experience. I really like a terminology that an atheist friend of mine, Ben Watkins, uses. He uses the illustration of like evidential chips. So like in poker and stuff, like you've got a chip that like weighs in your favor. So like, would you say that this is an evidential chip in favor of the truth of Christianity because you had the experience?
Yeah, I think so. In that right context, I think I would be hard pressed to use this as an argument to convince somebody else. But I will say, look, if I look at what happened to me and the series of events that brought me from atheism to Christianity, this one makes perfect sense as a first way to grab me by the throat and send me on to answer my
Mm-hmm.
questions. So that was.
Yeah.
It's in the broader context of a story in which every little turn and twist makes sense, and that ultimately leads me to becoming a Christian philosopher. So that's definitely one important chip, like you put it.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, we could even put this in some really fancy philosophical language too. We could say that, like, well, on Christianity, this experience wasn't too unexpected. It's not too surprising that you would have an experience like this at this time. But on the atheistic hypothesis, that doesn't really seem too plausible that you'd have this exact experience at this exact time. Like, it's definitely possible. It's not to say that this, no one ever has any experiences that are non-veridical, but it is to say that on the atheistic hypothesis, would we expect this type of experience to happen at this specific time in your life? And the answer that everyone has to give is no. That is not what we would expect. And so, even though this might not be like a knockdown proof for you, it is nevertheless, I think, and I think the audience ought to accept this as well, it is one evidential chip for you because you had the experience in favor of Christianity. And again, this is all just straight Bayesian probability theory. It's like, this is expected on this hypothesis, not expected on this other hypothesis. So therefore, confirmation for this hypothesis. Like, that's just sort of undeniable. So yeah, I think that's true. Anyways, let's get to continue the story. So you went up and you talked to the pastor. Unless you want to comment on what I just said, feel free to
No, I mean
continue
that
the
makes
story.
sense. It's a straightforward Bayesian, right, comparison, right? Or which hypothesis is best explained by the additional piece of evidence? Yes, that counts. Now, just how much weight does that have for the atheist who just has that piece? I don't know, but certainly for me, that was a big
Yeah.
turning point in sending me to the rest of the story, and that continued to bring me to Christ. So yes, so I introduced myself. I said that I had plenty of questions, and he said, "Yeah, let's talk about them." So his name was Robert. He was an American, but he had been in France for many years and had been pastoring this church in France. And so he said, "Yeah, let's talk about this. Let's make an appointment." And so I made an appointment, and I a few days later went to his office. He was surprised because he didn't really expect this young French atheist to actually come when made a meeting to talk about God. But I did, and that's we had a very good long conversation. And this started kind of a long relationship of numerous meetings like this, where I would go to his office and would crack open my questions, and he would answer from his own Christian point of view. And there's, how do I put it? So he wasn't really actively engaging in apologetics in the way that in capturing Christianity's viewers would be familiar with. I don't think that those positive arguments in favor of Christianity would have been really at the center of what we were discussing there. But he was giving me consistent answers from within his own worldviews, and that was already impressive enough in its own right. And through this conversation, there's a number of things that I came to appreciate on that have some apologetic value, and certainly in leading me to actually become a Christian. I ended up changing my mind on a number of things. So the first part is that I I don't know if I want to tackle those. I can list some of those topics on which the conversations really changed my mind. One is on my view of the supernatural and whether it was intellectually respectable to believe in the supernatural. Another one was on Christian ethics and surrounding sex, where clearly I was very hostile, and through conversations I came to appreciate that his view was defensible. Then there was my questions around science and the existence of God. So I thought that, first of all, I thought there was good reasons scientifically to believe that there is no God. And then I also wondered if you wouldn't need scientific proof in order to believe that God exists. And then I also was wondering if you needed to be certain before you could be justified in believing that God exists. So all of those topics I ended up changing my mind on through conversations with him and personal reflection on this topic. So we can dive into any of them that you would like to detail a little bit. But I don't know how you want to proceed here.
No, let's continue. Yeah, continue the story here. And I keep pulling up the wrong scene. We're gonna get to some Q&A, guys. So we've gone for about 30 minutes so far, and we're gonna go a total of about 90 minutes. So we are gonna get into some Q&A. If you have a question for Guillaume, then just let me know in the live chat. I'll keep an eye on it. But let's continue through the story at this point and get to the part where you eventually do embrace Christianity. Let's finish the story out.
Yeah, so let's tackle this like this. So in conversation with Robert, and I really enjoyed the conversation. He was a friendly guy, clearly intellectual. So I got to be reassured that he was not I was challenged by the fact that there was at least somebody who seemed smart, wasn't emotionally impaired, who's trying to just compensate for this problems by embracing religion. Clearly, genuinely well-meaning intellectual guy who believes that God exists and that Jesus was raised from the dead. And I just had to understand how that worked out. So that was a first challenge already, to see that there was something at least respectable and that you didn't necessarily need to turn off your brain to be a committed Christian. And then I had lots of questions about what they believed. So he helped me to work through my misconceptions about the Christian view of sex, because I thought it was repressive and intolerant. And in my own personal life, I had also been through a string of I would say broken relationship. I was pretty much adamant this was a huge part of my life. So I was bad news, essentially. I'd been on all sorts of conquests and being unfaithful to all sorts of my girlfriends. And there was a part of me that thought, okay, this is at least not working. The picture that he painted of the Christian view of marriage, that was clearly much more conservative than I was prepared to embrace, had started to have a bit of an appeal from the fact that I had cheated and lied and caused wreaked havoc in my own view of relationships. And that there was something appealing about the beauty of monogamy and to see commitments and lifelong commitments through marriage. He also helped me to clear off some of the misrepresentations of the French view of the Christian view of sex, because in French culture, it's fairly common to see critics of religion say that Christianity is basically anti-sex, that this is anti-women, that they hate the flesh. And so it was helpful for him to show me, no, there's actually a beautiful picture between the husband and the wife, and this is celebrated, and it's a gift of God. So he helped me work through those intellectually. There was like oppositions to the Christian faith. He can help me remove them. On the question of science, I was able to finally ask myself, through all of the scientific knowledge that I have studied in scientific school, in engineering school, was there anything that was actually hostile to God? And realized that it was kind of just a basic assumption I had, that somehow science and God were in conflict, but I had no specific knowledge that would tell me this is true, therefore God does not exist. Barely anything I've studied was even relevant to that question. So that is another hurdle to clear in my way to accepting Christianity. And then the big twist intellectually was in my reading of the New Testament. A couple of things. The first is that he had given me a nice booklet with a number of questions for me to get to understand the basics of the Christian faith. And the booklet was pointing you to the Bible, to scriptures, to find the answer for yourself. So it was nice. It kind of built trust that I didn't have to take his word for it, and I could just go and read what the Bible says on each of those topics. And it started to make sense to me. And so some questions started to be answered to at least understand the Christian view. And there's just one that didn't make sense to me and I did not understand. And it was kind of at the basic, at the heart of the Christian faith. And it was the big question of why Jesus had to die. His booklet made a big deal about Jesus dying, and I couldn't understand what the connection was between Jesus dying on the cross and me. If I were to ever become a Christian today, what would be the connection? So that was one piece, and I still have my handwritten notes on all of those questions where I didn't understand that. And then reading through the New Testament, still being challenged by this person of Jesus that I thought was more and more compelling as I read about him. I also realized that my expectations in terms of knowledge were completely misguided. I figured that if any of this is true, I would need to be absolutely certain that this is true. And so I initially let go of my need to have scientific proof, but I still thought, well, I needed to have absolute proof that this account that I'm reading is actually correct. The intellectual shift that disabused me of that expectation came when I realized that there's actually lots of things that I know, and that I know in very reliable ways, without having either scientific proof or certainty at all. And I realized there's what we call testimony, and that there's plenty of things that we're fully rational in believing on the basis of testimony. That somebody who saw it or who knows it tells you that this is true, and now you know that this is true as well. So there's plenty of things that I knew like that. You know, I know my date of birth like this. I know my name. I know who my parents are. Things that are very fundamental to me and who I am. I know them on the basis of a reliable testimony. And I came to start to appreciate the New Testament accounts about Jesus as reliable testimony of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. I realized that if I can trust a reliable source to give me knowledge, then these might well be in that category. They were an account of the people who saw what Jesus said and what he did, and then testified that they saw him after he was dead and they saw him alive again. And I came to realize there was intellectual merit in believing their testimony that was, again, a number of folks, right, independently attested, 4 different gospels. And these people were telling you, look, this is what we're telling you happened. So obviously, there's always room to discredit testimony, to say it's not reliable and you should not believe it. Right? So you don't want to be gullible and say, well, just when somebody says something, then now I can believe it and I can know what that is the truth. But at the time, I simply came to appreciate that this New Testament account of Jesus was a source that I could trust to have knowledge that these things really happen. So intellectually, the shift happened there, and I started to believe intellectually at least. But there was no openness emotionally, and just intellectually believing that those things are true doesn't make you a Christian. And the next piece that happened is that my prayer as an atheist, as an unbeliever, started to shift a little bit more towards God, if you're there, I'm starting to believe all of this story could be true. And if true, it's absolutely incredible. But I'm going to need you to reveal yourself to me very explicitly, very powerfully, in such a way that I won't just embrace this on blind faith and make a fool of myself. And so what I was kind of expecting was another open heaven and a voice coming down from heaven saying, welcome, son, and here I am. And what I explained is that what God did was less theatrical, but more brutal. And this is what he did. He's reactivated my conscience. And I realized that at that time, I had committed some really atrocious misdeed, basically involving cheating on this American girlfriend, but with very serious aggravating circumstances that I will not disclose here. And those things I had done, and I knew I had done them, but I had kind of suppressed it and covered them in lies to everybody to make sure that that would be an issue. That wouldn't be an issue. And I had lied to myself and saying, okay, this never happened. Let's move on. And in the midst of my research and unbelieving prayers, what happened is that this just came and was I mean, the way I describe it, there's no describing it in no theistic terms. God took this and shoved it in my face. And I was afflicted with guilt, like crippled with the guilt of what I have done. And I couldn't get away from this. It was just visible. It's all I could see. And so in that place of extreme pain is where the gospel that I had been reading about finally clicked. And I realized, well, here's the answer to my question that made no sense before. Why did Jesus have to die? Me. And because I was a sinner, he paid the penalty for my sin on the cross, and the whole Christian gospel came alive, and that finally made sense, and I embraced it and said, this is the truth, this is what happened. I have good intellectual reasons to believe it, and emotionally, experientially, it's crying out for, like, it's the answer to my situation. And so this is what gave way, and I surrendered and said, yes, okay, God, I'm all in. I forgive me. Like the Christian message, you're saved by faith, not by your good works. So by trusting in Jesus, I receive forgiveness. And this is what I've done. And the emotional answer has been that there's been a weight lifted off my shoulders. There was clearly a guilt that was like removed because I had been forgiven by the creator of the universe. And so this is the emotions that followed the intellectual assent initially.
So situate me though, when this happened. Was this before or after you had broken up with this girl that you were that you made the emotional connection?
We were still together. It was shortly before I actually went to New York for the first time. So I had that strong experience, the guilt, the surrender, and it was just before I went to New York. And there, so in terms of personal story, I had basically, I wasn't too sure what to do. Did I need to tell her? I had confessed to God, but was I going to tell her? And I don't know. I figured if I told her, that would probably be the end of our relationship. But I couldn't also live in lies, so I was very conflicted with like the inside guilt that tells me, yeah, I've done it. I can't just hide it. But if I tell her, then we're gonna break up, and I have to come back to France. So it was very indecisive for that vacation in New York. And it's the very last day of the vacation that I was forced to make up my mind. Also, during that vacation, I appreciated that she was not extremely stable, and so there was a lot of weird fights. And I figured if we're going to be together, if one of us is going to move, it's kind of a big deal. We better be certain that our relationship is going to work. And so I kind of use that also as kind of a pretext to say, well, look, that's not going to work between us anyway. So why do I need to tell her? Why do I need to confess if this is not going to work anyway? We might as well just break up, and I don't have to tell her. So I kind of took that step on the last day, saying, look, it's not going to work. Let's just break up. And then she broke down in tears, and I broke down in tears. It was very emotional, and like for a few hours of just discussing and just breaking down, I realized, look, I care for her. I don't want to actually break up. And so I just let it out. I confessed everything I've done. And she took it terribly. And we basically fought. And I flew back to France, and I thought we were basically done, and that was the end, and that I would need to live my life in France as a Christian, but still single now. But then as soon as I walked out of the airport, there was a message on my phone, and she had reached out and saying that she really wanted to try to forgive me, and that we should try to build something together. So this is when we started to rebuild on the foundation of no lies. And I took steps to actually move to the US. Now that I had actually embraced the Christian faith, and that all of this story started to make sense, and I was still on the race to be with her, I figured this has been God's doing to send me there. So I quit my job. I left my volleyball team. I left my band, and I found a job in New York. Here again, I was working in the financial industry, so it was very easy to find a job on Wall Street. The whole providence of God was throughout this story. So I got a job, moved to New York, and it's after a few months of being in New York with her that I realized this relationship is not going to work indeed. And then after too many months of trying to fight and to make it work, we realized we're just not meant to be together. It's not going to work. And so we broke up. And so it's after I moved to the US that we ended up breaking up, and that I found myself kind of wondering, like, what's next? Like, what happens now? I'm a newly converted Christian. I thought that God was in all of this to be with her, but not. And I had no social engagement at that point. I had no volleyball, no music, no nothing. I just had my job on Wall Street, but all of my evenings and weekends were entirely free. And this is just about the time that some questions started to come from France, from my family and friends, about my newfound faith, and where I found myself having to tell them why I hadn't lost my mind. And so I started to engage in some of those conversations to tell them why I became a Christian and some of the good reasons that I had thought of and I had experienced, to actually justify my Christian faith. And in this exercise, I started to have to provide reasons. At the time, I had no vocabulary for this. I didn't know this was apologetics. I was just trying to explain. But I realized I really enjoyed it. And I was doing well at explaining my beliefs coherently and trying to assess some of their objections. And then I also figured I want to learn more so that I can do this better. And so I started to read books and buy documentaries and debates, and followed the footnotes in some of the books and started to really enjoy this. Again, I was by myself and doing this with all of my time. So as I was doing this every weekend and every evening, I figured, well, if I'm going to be spending all of my time doing this, I might as well get a degree out of it. And so this is how I ended up signing up for seminary, and I did my master's. And then a few years later, pursued it with a doctoral work and did my PhD. And that's how I ended up being a philosopher, kind of despite me, without planning any of it. But one step to another, I ended up being a Christian philosopher.
Well, I really appreciate you spelling out your story in a lot more detail than I've heard you do in other interviews. So that's really cool. And we talked about doing like another interview, a follow-up interview once your book actually comes out. So let's plan on doing that, even if it's just like a straight Q&A with the audience on like your story. We can still do something like that. But I wanted to focus in on the thing that I know that skeptics are going to say about your conversion story. And that is that you converted because of this girl. You became a Christian because for like, I mean, that's what they're going to say. Not every single skeptic obviously is going to say that, but those that like to psychoanalyze Christians, this is what they're going to say. And so I wanted to ask you, like, do you think that if this was the cause of you becoming a Christian, this girl, when you broke up with this girl, don't you think that it would follow that you would at least become somewhat less confident that Christianity is true, or maybe you would fall away from Christianity, maybe you'd just become an atheist again? Doesn't it make sense that if this girl was the reason that you became a Christian, that once that girl was out of the picture, then you would just sort of fall back to your old ways, if it wasn't like a real thing, if it was just for love, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think that's one way of responding to that possible worry, to say, well, look, even after we broke up, it's not like it was shaking my faith or that I abandoned it. So therefore, that was just a thing that I did for her. I mean, I suppose the really bad faith critic is going to be saying, well, yeah, but now you had made the jump, so you try to justify it so that you wouldn't look foolish. I suppose you can go down that road, and I'm not trying to necessarily defend myself against that. I think that some of the reasons that led me to be a Christian in the first place are still cogent, and they are standing by themselves. I think my assessment of the New Testament and the ability to know what happened to Jesus stands. Now, at the time, I was not necessarily aware of the actual discipline of criticism, right, of the historical sources. Like, what are some of the arguments against the reliability of the New Testament, and what are the best defenses? But the way I describe it is that you don't need to know the argument for and against in order to actually come to know something when the source is reliable, right? So if you think of my knowledge that the Holocaust happened, for example, it was based on reliable historical sources because I was told when I was in school that the Holocaust happened. And I knew that it happened from the very day that I was told. But now I didn't know, nor do I know now, what the arguments against the Holocaust are. I know that there are Holocaust deniers. I'm sure they have some arguments, and I don't even know what they are. But I didn't need to know the arguments and their refutations in order to be justified in believing that the Holocaust happened. And in the same way, I remain convinced that the knowledge that I acquired from reading the New Testament sources was justified. It was warranted. I actually acquired knowledge. And now, obviously, today I have increased in my confidence of it because I know the debates around the reliability. But I remain convinced that I genuinely formed knowledge at the time. And my losing that relationship afterwards didn't really affect any of my confidence in these sources. So I rested on my understanding of that as the foundation. And then there's a bit of additional reasoning, right? So this actual positive that came out of my conversion story. So I suppose there's some degree of argumentation in favor of the reliability, the reasoning that these people were likely not making stuff up, that this was not liars, because again, they were many of them tortured and killed for this belief. So it's kind of a common line of reasoning in Christian apologetics today to show that this is a point in favor of reliability, that these people really had little or nothing to gain in making up the stories about Jesus, that the question that they would be deceived about the resurrection of their own masters is also very unlikely. So there was kind of a historical argument that was present and underlying some of my thinking at the time, even though I wouldn't have fleshed it out in the way that an apologist today would do it systematically. So those pieces were there and they contributed to my being convinced. And like you pointed out when we broke up, so I did ask myself, like, how central was this to my belief in Christianity that I would end up with her? And when I was on that plane coming back to France, convinced that we had broken up, I basically thought, hey, if if the God exists and this is clearly a challenge to my Christian faith, like am I going to be tempted to let the whole thing go and say, hey, never mind, let's go back to square one in France and let's just jump on the next conquest? And the reflection was very short-lived, and I realized, no, this is nonsense. I have come to embrace a truth that I found liberating. The gospel is great news, and I'm not going to let go of that. And so I really didn't really consider changing those beliefs. So that was true before I moved to the US and thought I had broken up. And that was true after we broke up as well. And I was just looking for God's next purpose. And as it turns out, he had a wonderful plan. And that plan ended up having lots of redemption as well. I ended up meeting my wife of today, who is an American, wonderful Christian woman that I've married. And we've had 5 adorable kids together. And so the grand story has been full of redemption and redeeming, but the individual parts of hurt and this disappointment have not really challenged my belief that I had come to embrace the truth.
Every time I hear you say your story, you have more kids. How many? You have 5 now. That is a lot.
Yes, but God willing, this is the team is done. So okay. That's good. But yes, I have 5 kids, and it's a wonderful, wonderful life.
Oh man, 5 kids. That is so much. I have 2, and my wife and I can like barely hang with just 2.
That's it. You're already outnumbered. You've already given up. You're already outnumbered with 2.
Okay. All right. Let's get to some questions. So a bunch of questions have actually already been sent in. A lot of questions have been centered around your views on Calvinism and compatibilism and stuff. But I'm going to try to stick to questions that are on topic for today. I mean, I plan on having I was about to call you Guillaume. Guillaume, I'm going to have him back on the channel at some point. So we can definitely do that. But here's a super chat that we got from Trinity Radio from my friend Braxton Hunter. He says, "Sup, Cam and Guillaume." And what's up?
Yeah. So what is up? What is up is that I'm here now. Yeah, I really like Braxton. We've interacted and obviously disagreed a bit on free will, but he's been a fun conversation partner, and I respect him a lot.
There you go. I also love him.
Even though he misspelled my first name, obviously.
He did. There's a U in there. There's a U in there, Braxton. Maybe he ran out of letters. I don't know. Maybe that's what happened. Okay, meow, meow, meow. And this one is a little bit off topic, but I thought I'd throw it in here. Does Dr. Bignon have any thoughts on divine simplicity?
We're really off topic, but I'll answer. It's kind of biographical. Whatever thoughts I do have on divine simplicity are not very deep, so I will point to Cameron's excellent interviews with actual experts on the question, and they will be much more helpful. But if you're interested biographically, my understanding is fairly limited. Some of the more extreme representations of divine simplicity strike me as at the least strange, if not incoherent. But there might be some more modest formulation of divine simplicity that I can jump on board. So when sometimes this is formulated as the idea that God is identical to his attributes, for example, or identical to his nature, that strikes me as odd, because that's not how I understand attributes, and I don't think they could be identical to God. But this is very sophomoric, and I'm sure that defenders of divine simplicity have very strong explanations in response to that. It's just that I haven't really studied the matter much more. But yes, I'm tentatively, like, in the very modest formulations of divine simplicity, when we're just saying God doesn't have parts, or that he's not a composed being of different things, that's all good with me, and I'm signing up for this. When we start to get into the claims that God is identical to his attributes, I start to at least have serious questions. That's where I am.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Sorry about getting so off topic. Okay, here we go. Philadelphia Collins. And this one, he was kind of responding to a comment by another atheist. Yeah, bro was definitely never a true atheist. Then he says he was never a true Scotsman either. But I wanted to, which is pretty clever. But I wanted to focus on that a little bit, because there are atheists who are going to say, oh, well, you were never a true atheist. And I think what they're getting at is that they want to say that you were never a true skeptic, because the way that you started was just like you just embraced atheism because that's like kind of the culture that you grew up in, and that was just like what seemed natural, normal. And so it wasn't that like skepticism was really appealing to you. But I want to make a distinction between atheism and skepticism. You don't have to be a skeptic in order to be an atheist, right? So that
yeah. So I don't know if I mean, I think I would have put myself in both of those categories, but perhaps you mean something stronger about skeptic. But to me, skeptic is the person who is skeptical of claims of God's existence, right? Or I don't know if you read more of an epistemology of skepticism.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of like an underlying epistemology of like a bar of evidence that's got to be met in order for someone to hold some certain belief. Yeah. And so it's like it's a kind of, it's a more of an epistemological principle that someone is sort of embracing. That's what I would associate more with a skeptic, as opposed to just the label of someone who doesn't believe that God exists or something like that. I would just call them an atheist or an agnostic.
Yeah, so I mean, perhaps that's a fine distinction to say of me, but even on those terms, I would say that I was, right. I mean, I would say that I would have claimed that you need a certain amount of evidence before you can believe anything, and I would have prided myself in only believing those things. Now, the truth is, I didn't have a strong argument for atheism along those lines. Oh, my camera, I think, is making a bit of a scene.
Take your time.
I think
it could be that your camera like froze up a little bit because maybe got a little bit too hot. You've got a really nice camera set up, and so sometimes that can happen.
Yeah, so let me see. I don't know that your software for streaming is going to allow this. So
it may, yeah. If you just switch your camera.
Yeah, I might switch my camera.
Just for the remainder of the interview. There we go. Yeah, that'll work. That'll work for the remainder of the interview.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's. Yeah, pick up where you left off. So you were saying that you would classify yourself as a skeptic.
Yes.
Sense.
So
here we go.
Yeah. So it came back. So yeah. So I would say, I mean, I've had that criticism thrown at me in the past, like, oh, he was never really an atheist. But I would ask, what does it take to be an atheist? When I did not believe that God exists, I positively affirm that God does not exist, and I look down on the belief in God as something that's intellectually subpar, only done by emotional people who have to compensate for something. So that's pretty strong affirmations that I think qualify as an atheist. Perhaps a concern might be that I was not a sophisticated atheist, right? And in that sense, yes, I will grant that, because it might have been a more impressive testimony if I had been a very knowledgeable atheist with strong arguments for atheism that needed to be struck down first before I could embrace theism and Christianity. And yes, I admit I did not have very strong arguments for atheism. I did, however, have strong barriers against belief because I was extremely prejudiced and very much angry at the idea of God's existence and religion in general. So I think those barriers were there and had to be struck down. But there's no debating whether I was an atheist. I clearly affirmed those things and was very adamant in those beliefs at the time.
Yeah, and the part of the distinction I wanted to make is that I don't think you've got to be a skeptic necessarily in order to be an atheist. If we define atheist as the belief or someone who just believes that there is no God, like you don't have to be skeptical in order to reach that conclusion. You could just have that belief for no reason. Right. So I wanted to make a distinction here, and I think the real issue that someone is going to have is that you weren't skeptical enough, but what you just responded to that with is that you were very skeptical. You might say that you weren't a sophisticated skeptic or whatever, but I would argue that a lot of online atheists aren't sophisticated skeptics either. They are, psychoanalyzers for sure. Those that like to psychoanalyze their opponents are probably not on the sophisticated spectrum very far. But let's continue. We did just have a super chat that came in from Cy Gart, who is another ex-atheist who became a Christian through the evidence. So he says, did you have any difficulty with the concept of the Trinity when you were first considering Christianity?
No, that's not really a topic that concerned me much. I would probably not have had a very orthodox language to describe whatever I was seeing. But my embrace of Christianity was based more on my reading of the New Testament and realizing, okay, the centrality of the person of Jesus, what he did, what he said, and then his death and resurrection on the cross. So I came to see that there was a very exalted picture of Jesus that was claimed by Christians to be God the Son, God in the flesh. And that seemed acceptable to me. I didn't see an obvious contradiction in those kinds of claims. I didn't have a fully fleshed out understanding or even a reading of God being one being in three persons and how you articulate this in the relationships of the Trinity. So the question was not too deep into that, and that was not really a barrier to belief. The way I would say is that if you were to take an inconsistent view of Christianity, right, where you actually deny some of that, and you only have Jesus dying on the cross to pay the price for our sins, then this little part is what I saw and embraced. And then obviously that incomplete picture would have failed to connect the dots. Some people would say, well, if he's not truly God in the flesh, then he cannot really atone for our sins, or those kinds of connections might exist. But I didn't really raise those connections myself at the time. I simply read this text. It rang true. I had good reasons to believe it, and I embraced the message of salvation in Christ. But I fleshed out a view of God's nature and the Trinity a little bit later on when studying more deeply those theological questions.
Guillaume, let's fix your camera real quick. So when you were messing with it, I think you adjusted the focus a little bit too far forward. So scoot it back a little bit. More. Do a little bit more. Other way. No, yeah, other way. There you go. Right. No, too far. There you go. Right there. Perfect. Okay, there you go. Now you don't have. Now you don't feel like you have to be all zoomed into the camera. There you go.
Yeah, photographer is not one of my jobs. So.
Yeah, well, I wanted to help you out a little bit. It was just it was bothering me, honestly.
Good.
All right, here we go. Here's some more questions. Okay, yeah. So this is from Parker's Pensies, and you know Parker. So, and I was just reading it a little bit to make sure that it's on topic, which I think it is. It says, "Did you have the categorical ability to choose to follow Christ? If not, then didn't God manipulate you into it?" I don't know, just spitballing here, but wouldn't it be overriding manipulation?
Parker is awesome. So this is a wonderful ability to plug his podcast, because Parker and I did a podcast, an episode that was maybe 2 hours long, 2+, on the manipulation argument against compatibilism. So that's a big conversation that I want to point your audience to. Subscribe to Parker Spence's podcast and look for our discussion of manipulation, where we discuss a lot of those things. I don't know if there's a serious question. I think he's spitballing here. But is there something meaningful that I want to hear? Did I have the category ability to show Christ?
Let's just leave it at that. Let's point people to that episode, because if you guys talk about that, let's just leave it at that. I think that's a good idea, and that way we can push people to his YouTube channel. Yeah. So go check out Parker's Pensies. His channel is awesome just in general. So go check him out. Go subscribe to his channel and watch some of his stuff. So let's leave it at that though. All right, we just got a few more questions. If you guys want to send in as super chat, obviously that's a great way to make sure that your question is answered today. But otherwise, I think we've got about 3 other questions in the queue. And then if we don't get any super chats or any other questions in the live chat, then we'll close this one out. So Tommy S had a question earlier. He says, why is the move always to equate mundane testimony with whatever the New Testament says? How on earth are those equivalent?
Yeah, so no one is saying that they are equivalent in the sense that they have everything in common, right? So the move here was simply to say that, to show an example that it's possible to have knowledge on the basis of testimony. And so that's why I take mundane testimony that I think we can all agree are reliable and can give you knowledge, And this is an example to show that it's possible to have knowledge on the basis of testimony. Now, I go beyond this and apply and say, no, now let's talk about the New Testament and what kind of testimony we have in there. And this is the work of apologists today, to assess, do we have reliable historical testimony in there? And I obviously take the view that yes, we do. But that's kind of the exercise of the apologetic debate there. But the connection from the mundane testimony to this is simply to show you, look, even on your own terms, there is such a thing as knowledge from testimony. And I'm claiming that the New Testament also gives you that. Now, let's look at whether that's actually a move we can make, but I'm not jumping inappropriately from one to the other or claiming that they're equivalent in all ways. There are obviously some differences, and we just need to see if those differences are relevant.
Okay, 2 more questions. All right, here we go. This one is, well, this is not a question. This was more of a comment, and it's something that we touched on earlier, but maybe we can spend a little bit more time on it. Love how it's always a girl that sways a so-called atheist.
Yeah, I guess we've addressed that appropriately. This is the girl was the impetus for me to even go and reject. So yeah, I could make the exact opposite argument and say, well, this girl was the motivation not to become a Christian, right? It was a motivation to refute Christianity. So what did you do? Well, no, if I had stayed an atheist and I had disproven her faith, there wouldn't have been any more reason to believe that Christianity is true or false. So I don't think this is super relevant to my story, and ultimately, I think that my Christianity is not based on whatever I was trying to do with this girl.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, one more question for Mr. Bignon. You said you felt justified in believing the gospel is due to testimony without other types of evidence. Do you believe that there is any other evidence, scientific, philosophical, etc.?
Yes. So if you gather some of the reasons that pushed me towards belief, there is that, right? There's the testimony, the historical testimony of the Gospels, plus a little bit of my reasoning around the alternative explanations, right? So the idea that they were reliable because not likely lying, because not likely manipulating. And then for me, there was also the overall storyline of my conversion that kind of points to God in a number of different places where things were improbable and they happened at just the right time. So the random hitchhiking, the hotel being right next door to us, the shoulder injury that freed me on the Sunday morning, the chills experience when I left the church, the relevance of the Christian good news when I felt extremely convicted for what I had done. So all of those events that happened at the right time served as evidential support for my embrace of Christianity. And these are some of the pieces that were instrumental before my conversion. But yes, after my conversion and I started to engage in apologetics, there was a number of good reasons for theism that I came to discover and that I found convincing and that bolster my conviction as well and equipped me to defend my beliefs in apologetics. So if they're asking, for example, I mean, nothing that I have professional proficiency in, but I did become acquainted with the work of William Lane Craig and some of the basic arguments that he uses in his debates and find many of them convincing. So the various cosmological arguments, the fine-tuning arguments, things that I came to discover in my own research after conversion when I started to give answers, and that I've used throughout the years in conversations on apologetics. And obviously, folks like Craig and Gary Habermas and Mike Licona take the reliability of the New Testament accounts and develop them into an argument in favor of the resurrection. And I think that that's also a line of reasoning that I find interesting and successful. And that's somewhat baked into my claim that I knew that Jesus was risen from the dead from reading the New Testament sources. They just use this and formulate it into an argument that's aimed at convincing the skeptic.
So I told you before we went live that I had a question for you from David Wood. He's actually a patron of ours. And so here's his question. He says, ask him why he always talks like he's got a croissant in his mouth.
Well, because I do. This is a little known fact. I always have a croissant in my mouth, but it's very small, so you cannot see it. David, you got to love the guy.
Is there like a story behind that he... I don't know. I probably shouldn't ask.
No, there's no story. It's just David Wood. And yes, as
David Wood being a jerk.
David Wood should not ask.
Okay. All right. I think that's going to do it for us. Is there anything that you'd like the audience to know about you or your story before we close out the show today?
No, nothing specific. I mean, I will point out that my book telling that same story is coming out later this year. So in June, the book is called Confessions of a French Atheist. It's published by Tyndale. It's already available on pre-order. And it's kind of the fun retelling of the story with all the details, and used somewhat as a springboard for discussions of some of the apologetic material that I came to discuss with you as well. So it's a fun read, and it's also an apologetic introduction for at the popular level. And I very much look forward to seeing what God does with that book release.
Awesome. Well, I did want to say that we've got a show coming up in just 2 days with Gary Habermas. You mentioned him earlier. And we're looking at some new evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. So if you guys are interested in that sounds interesting, then make sure to tune in live. I know that if you're watching this after the fact, then you can't really tune in live. That's kind of impossible. But if you are watching this live and you are 2 days away from this event happening in 2 days from now, then make sure to tune in live. Otherwise, you can just go watch it right now. So that's actually a benefit if you're not watching it live. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in today. Thanks, Guillaume, for coming on. It's been a lot of fun. We need to do, like I said, a show on some of the philosophical work that you've done, because I mean, I was listening to your stuff on compatibilism, and I think that you are a very careful thinker. Like the way that you structure your arguments and the way that you define your terms is very, very careful. You make sure that you're not like refuting yourself in some way. It's very good work. So I applaud you on that, and I want to like get into it at some point. So
thank you so much.
We got to do it. We got to do it.
Having me too. It was a blast. So I'll be very happy to discuss any of those things anytime with you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity live stream. Have a good one. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value